it had not been for the Lord on our side, where would we be? I've been young and am now older, but I have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor God's seed begging for bread. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good, and God's mercy endures to all generations. You've heard the reading of the text. The late poet laureate Maya Angelou prophetically intoned in 1983 the realities of differing contexts of justice. The free bird thinks of another breeze, the trade wind soft through the sighing trees, the fat worms waiting on dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a cage bird stands on the graves of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. He opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longs for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. Our world often seems divided between the haves and the have-nots, the free and the enslaved, the privileged and the penalized, the powerful and the powerless, those working for justice and those satisfied with the status quo. Contemporarily, there exists a critical mass of scholars, academics, pastors, preachers, teachers, liturgists, congregants, and even politicians who articulate a deep faith profession and belief attestation about striving toward a beloved community, where all God's children walk together, where liberty and justice for all are not just words in a historical document, where we the people and that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness stuff is not a question on a new citizen's exam, where community is not a catchphrase but a lived experience. I believe that the existence of a just society depends on whether one's social location is inside or outside that cage. How one's personal practices, beliefs, impediments, barriers, obstructions, prohibitions, complicity may impede the understanding of biblical imperatives about making things right, about care and love and protection, of right relationships between people, that sense of solidarity. Bonhoeffer was quoted in Cost of Discipleship, I quote, "Judging others makes us blind, whereas love is illuminating. By judging others, we blind ourselves to our own evil and to the grace which others are just as entitled to as we are," end quote. My social transformation doctoral work with the late Vincent G. Harding helped me focus on the established processes and procedures for individual and collective justice, but also the realities of those times when persons who dedicate their lives to the prophetic call to do justice and love mercy while coming with their God experience justice fatigue. Surely if one is attentive to breaking news and internet postings and Sunday talking heads and so-called expert panels and talk show monologues and campaign promises and retreat discussions and waiting room conversations and restaurant declarations and conference debates and even the whispered musings on the back row of our classrooms, one might consider the incontrovertible evidence that many are focused on creating beloved equal society, but others are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. Perhaps they experience justice fatigue. Justice fatigue from trying years to leave their cages and their caves and committees and classrooms where more things change, the more they remain the same. Justice fatigue from running out of words and fears and tears to describe how life is inside the center or outside the center. Justice fatigue rehearsing the veracity of pain from microaggressions even on the lips of well-meaning colleagues. Justice fatigue from being too hesitant to speak or engage or form alliances for fear of removing the scab of old complicitous wounds. Justice fatigue from the conspiracy of silence, political inaction and conversation of keeping things the way it was or we can't find one like you. Justice fatigue from smiling when nothing's funny and scratching when you don't itch. Castigated for language use and laughter and modifying your physicality to fit into a standard with people that don't like you anyway. Tired of the possibility of having to attend one more discussion and one more sermon and one more group and one more lecture and one more petition and one more protest and one more seminar only to refer it to a committee for discussion in another 4 years. The cage of re-traumatization, of the rehashing of past emotional and psychological wounds, cascading the first 5 minutes of each and every newscast. The cage of compassion fatigue for vicarious trauma, what occurs when there's a tension from having deep sympathy from some suffering, but the demands on your own personal life. The cage of burnout, where we feel hopeless and helpless and cynical. That the different song from inside the cage that results in spiritual PTSD from the exposure to stress associated with the day-to-day trying to live and just get along with your life. One might ask, how do you survive, live through, in spite of justice fatigue in an age of instantaneous exposure and critique? How does one recover from a caged experience having spent their entire life watching others run and soar and fly and move around at will without anyone asking why they were there? Our focus text, they told me I could preach, from the book of Isaiah. Robert Franklin said, be academic for the first few minutes and then go, so I'm going now. Our focus text from the book of Isaiah is quoted often more than any other place in the New Testament. And the Isaiah, that southern prophet living in Judah who prophesied during the reign of 4 kings, urgently warned a complacent and arrogant people of the impending war with the Assyrians, and there would be nothing less than the judgment of God on the nations. In our text, the destruction of Jerusalem has taken place. The scroll of Isaiah appears to address a situation during an exile. An exile, that state or period of forced voluntary absence from one's homeland or country. Have you ever been in exile? In a strange land, on a tremulous terrain, in a desolate, disturbing district, in a backward situation, in an uncomfortable spot, not knowing what to think or who to trust, wondering why in the world God brought you to Candler in the first place. God's consolation of the people is in full force in the text. They believed God had forsaken them for good reasons. They became infatuated with other people's customs and symbols of wealth and power. They worship and bow down at the idols of musicians and entertainers and athletes and politicians and corporate execs and media talking heads and even some preachers who called themselves prophets. The exilic community was well organized. They enjoyed government jobs and corporate accounts and unlimited credit offers and clothing and jewelry that cost more than 1 month's paycheck, and the newest models of chariots, and even some of them began walking like the Babylonians and talking like the Babylonians and denying their heritage and trying to fit in. They were free to maintain their own religious life and worship, but something was missing in them. They began to long for their homeland. They became bitter and complaining, and the exiles mourned because they believed God had forsaken them. But there's an interesting shift in the text. Something begins to happen. You know, when you've done something to someone, you can only run from it for so long. Can you hear them? God, we know we have done wrong. We need to hear from you. We need a word from you. And the text mentions that there's a meeting of the heavenly council, God and the angelic messengers, and they observe everything that's going on. And a disembodied voice on the heavenly council says the nations deserve everything that they're getting. God has no obligation to intervene. But something like with parents pricks God's heart. And God says, that's it. These are my children. I need to send a message to them that they aren't free yet, but it's on the way. Look at the process. God calls for this revival. God says, these are my sons and daughters. No matter what they've done, no matter how ungrateful they have seemed, they have demonstrated some repentance, and it's time for them to turn back to me. And Cyrus miraculously signs a decree, a law that somebody's going to veto probably later on. But the news was hard for the people to believe. See, people don't understand when you've been enslaved, it's hard to take freedom at first glance. The old recordings are still playing about there were nothing and they wouldn't be anybody at all, but God is forgiving them anyway. So in the text, Isaiah is given an assignment to proclaim that in due time they can return to their homeland. And then there's this image in the text that I love about God arriving in the desert. God, there's thunder in the desert. There's the roads being straight. There are no bumps, no curves, no hills, no valleys, clearing the path so that nothing blocks their approach or God's approach to them, that God's returning to their hearts. There's no obstacle to present. There are no laws. There are no lies. There's no nothing. Everyone is able to come to God. God doesn't care who they say they are. They can come to God freely. Everybody is saying God is doing this. And Isaiah found himself ministering to people that were confused about who they were, like people you face today. People that do the right thing yet suffer because of other people. People that don't always attend temple or follow God's command, become de-churched, but they go from church to church to church looking for their own agenda. Those that are not sure of their salvation but act like they know the word, but they never have any word inside of them. Those that never have a thought of salvation. Yet the prophet living with the exiles, advocating for them daily, is tired. Have you ever been a tired prophet? Counseled with them, visited them in prison, tried to teach them, warned them, cajoled them. In the midst of ministry, burnout, never had a sabbatical because he couldn't get the grant money, hadn't seen his wife and sons for 2 years, gave them assignments, they didn't do their homework, studied new ways of delivering information, they didn't come to class, wrote a new curriculum, they said it was boring, placed the requirements in the syllabus, they didn't look at it until it's time for the test, probably lost his temper a few times like Grandmaster Flash. Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's just a jungle out there. Took down his office hours posting, turned off his cell, referred everything to voicemail. No matter how hard he tried, the people would not change. And the prophet says to God, I've run out of lessons. These people are weak. They're not loyal. They invest only in themselves. They don't want to hear the truth. They will never change. And God says, let me holler at you for a minute. He said, I didn't ask you to save anybody. That's my job. All I told you is to tell the people what I want them to know. Remember, I knew you before you thought you were a big bad prophet. I just told you to teach them the commandments, tell them about their lives as heir. You are a bearer of good news, speak loud and clear, tell them that God is coming in power. And God begins to give a refresher course on God's credentials. Who comes close to being God? Who can you compare to God? No one. Haven't you been paying attention? Haven't you been listening? Haven't you heard the stories for all of your life? Don't you understand the foundations of things? Did you forget that no matter how much technology you have, you cannot out-Google God? In my sanctified imagination, I see God calling a prophet forward and giving him an assignment. He attended a really nice seminary where he had a D-Min, an MRPL, an MTS, a THM, a D-Min, a THD, and an actual not internet PhD. And he received positive feedback on everything. He knew his context. He understood the needs of the people, so he takes a familiar text. Have you not known? Have you not heard? You're already supposed to know who God is. It's been written down. It's been passed through oral tradition. It's in the songs of praise. Why don't you act like you know who God is? Did the server crash? Did you miss your colloquy? Did you skip temple? Don't you know that the Lord is the everlasting God, the creators of the end of the earth? God is limitless. Even the particles of dust you stand on were created by God and not you. But let me tell you how to survive. He reminds him that nobody can do anything by themselves. God doesn't faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. Even the youth will faint and be weary. But they that wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Now the prophet begins to build his case. He knew he had sense enough to know you have to preach with a text. Y'all get that later on in my class. Begins to build his text about how to survive when you are worn out, exhausted from doing the work, trying to start over, returning to the source. Controlling image was the eagle. An eagle weighs 10 to 14 pounds with a wingspan of 6 to 7 feet. An eagle can fly at an altitude of 10,000 feet and go 30 to 35 miles an hour. An eagle soars on current of warm air and updrafts generated by the terrain over the valley edges and mountain slopes. An eagle soars, accomplished with very little wing flapping, enable them to conserve their energy. An eagle is covered with 7,000 lightweight, strong, highly flexible feathers. An eagle has feathers that protect them from the cold as well as the heat of the sun, trapping the air. They provide waterproofing and protection, but during the lifetime, you see, an eagle goes through a molting period, twice a year, lasting 150 days, losing all of its feathers, its beak, its strong talons. The magnificent bird becomes helpless, and all its protection is inability to soar, or remove one feather at a time. exhausted from clustered towering and gated covenanting and property gentrifying and assault exercising and melanin privileging. An eagle has brain fog from immigrant obstruction and racialized hiring and cultural appropriating and genderized evaluating and selective policing. An eagle has dullness from quota admitting, bigotry accepting, color crashing, history bashing, child trafficking, faint from religious demonizing, post-trolling, life executing, liturgy colonizing, affluenza sentencing, listless from healthcare withdrawing, elder warehousing, media shaming, race dividing, cyberbullying, draining from love commodifying, war funding, lifestyle debasing, love critiquing, and political pandering, fatigue from truth fabricating, global stereotyping, linguistic lynching, humanity euthanizing, resource hoarding, and death rising. An eagle watches all of that fall a little bit at a time until it's laying all around them. And during that time, they begin to lack physical strength. They begin to even walk like a turkey, no strength to fly. It brings on a period of depression, a wilderness experience, a time of exile, a time of great depression, laying in a heap. It can't even yell because the voice doesn't come up. And at the time, the eagle chooses some place on a mountain where the sun can shine directly on them, and they lay out on a rock and bake in the sun. They congregate with others of the same condition. The molting eagles understand what is happening to them. They scratch their talons down to numbs. The beat breaks off, and they become completely vulnerable, and some are on the verge of death. An eagle can't even provide then sustenance for themselves. But during that time, it is observed that other eagles come and drop food to the ones that are molting. See, the ones that have been there and done that, hear me, millennials, are the ones that can tell you that you don't have to walk through anybody's wall or be knocked down by anybody else. You can't teach what you don't know, and you can't lead where you won't go. The younger eagles never drop any food, but the older eagles who have survived the experience known as molting know what you're going through. The waiting period lasts for quite a while depending on the individual need of the eagle, that the feathers grow back a little bit at a time. Well, preacher, what does that say to me? Too many of us find ourselves soaring. We work tirelessly for justice and justice of others and self. We devote every spare minute to being in service. We don't brag, we just do. No need for a selfie signifying the great work we just did for somebody else at Thanksgiving or Christmas. No live posting of you feeding somebody. We volunteer at the food bank. We've gone on 5 mission trips. We sent water to Flint. We protested executions. We rallied at the site of blood-soaked streets for one more black and brown body. We volunteered for nonviolent training. We breathed God's imperative to love with all our heart, soul, and mind, our neighbor as ourselves. We dedicate our lives to ways to alleviate the pain. We hashtag justice morning, noon, and night. We post whenever we can. We got 10 shirts already emblazed with justice sayings, and we don't follow any of them. But then you wake up one morning and you find you're too tired to get out of bed because everything that sings the same way that it was yesterday. We gradually begin to molt, losing bits and pieces of our faith in humanity and perhaps God. We cringe at the thought of turning on the news. We can't eat, we can't talk, we can't teach, we can't sing. Depression takes our joy away, our determination away. But I hear Isaiah echoing over the ages, have you not known? Have you not heard who God is? He begins an excellent catechism with this generation of God's children. Didn't God already show you that no matter what you're in, God can deliver you from? God delivered Samuel from nightly interrogations, and Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael from a death sentence, and Ruth from bitter widowhood, and Naaman from arrogance, and Isaiah from mourning an earthly king, and Hannah from childlessness, and Esther from avoiding responsibility, and Zechariah from spiritual laryngitis, and the widow of Zarephath from starvation, and Jonah from his own bigotry, and Vashti from indignity, and Elijah from whining about the burden of ministry, and Job from familial grief, Jeremiah from fear of failure, Zechariah from a nosebleed section on a parade route, Zacchaeus, the woman with the issue of blood from poor health care. And if God could be present with the eagle, what more will God do for you? Have you not known? I know it's your first year, but have you not heard? God is able to do more than we can conceive. Only God can end oppression and end ecclesiastical apartheid and alleviate social triage and acknowledge everybody's humanity and end victimization through us and in spite of us. Have you not known? Have you not heard? I realize it's your second year, perhaps, and you've done all the required coursework. But don't you know that because God loves and cares for us, God sits high and God looks low, that God can do everything and give you back the strength you need to go on a little further? Have you not heard? I recognize it's your last year, and surely you've had some private devotion time that you didn't have your first year. I'm going to wait on you. Spread eagle on the rock in total submission to God. Laying there, say, God, here I am. God, you protected me last year through disasters. You helped me last year to survive character assassination. You helped me flourish in the face of failure. You blossomed in spite of me not having any checks in the bank. You helped me succeed in all the barriers around me. Recognize that I've been fatigued, but you have been there. Yes. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Doctoral students and great scholars and activists. God is providing us a new syllabus on how to, even with deep passion, get rest and still do the work. I recommend to you on this syllabus, Sankofa, go back and see what happened before so you can go forward. Contemporary, tired, cage-dwelling, justice-fatigued people learning to dream again. Use the tools you know have worked before and sharpen them up for the present situation. Ignore those who critique your choice of what justice work to do or how long you do the justice work. You can't do it all, but do what God tells you to do at that time. I recognize Ubuntu, selfish altruism, where we learn to love everybody in spite of who we are with radical reconciliation. But let me just say, let me have another take on it. You cannot do the work of justice unless you love yourself. Too many people do knee-jerk justice and hate themselves for doing it. I recommend Patricia Hill Collins' intellectual activism, where you use critical thinking and effective learning. You need to know what people are feeling as well as what they're thinking in order to work on the cracks of the system that requires our learning in multiple languages and the power convincingly. But most importantly, as the text says, if you want to overcome justice fatigue, you must wait and pause and rest and step back and breathe and hope, stopping when God says listen, going where God says to go and not what's convenient for you. Stop checkbook missionary work and go live among the people, not telling them what they need, but asking what you can do with them. If we don't rest, darkness will never get out of light's way. Weeping will not move out of joy's presence. Souls will not be saved. Sinners will not be converted. The lost will not be found. The blind will not see. The deaf will not hear. The disabled will never walk. The voices will not speak. The sick will not get well. The enslaved will not be set free. Wars will never cease. Governments will not have integrity. Nations will not be unified. The unemployed will not have jobs. Children will not be safe. The youth will not be educated. The elders will not be respected. Heritage will not be remembered. Prayers will not have purpose. Songs will not be composed. Sermons will not be preached. Minds will not be expanded. Houses will not be built. Churches will not be filled. Peace will not be attained. Dreams will not be actualized. Lives will not be changed. Believers will not see God's face. The faithful will not receive their home in heaven if we just stay on the rock and don't ask God to come and help us. Let God remove all of the barriers. Legendary justice advocate Angela Davis once said, sometimes we have to do the work even though we don't yet see a glimmer on the horizon that is actually going to be possible. As we begin this academic year, recognizing we have 75 more long days before the presidential election. Help us, Jesus. Fire on one coast and water on another. Earthquakes around the world. People of faith still need to know that it may not be your day to help, but help is on the way. No matter how many adjectives we use to parse what we describe as the value of life, and consequently, no matter where we worship God, remember God is on the way. Our debt has been paid. The heavenly council is interceding on our behalf. God sits high and looks low. God is at the center, whether it's margin or center. God is still the center of our life. God alone can make the rough places smooth out, the valleys be raised, the mountains be pushed down, and all creation will see it together. We too, when we wait on God, no longer have to be exhausted, impatient, drooping, taxed, wearied, or fatigued. When we wait on God, our minds can be renewed and reaffirmed and restored and revived and reinvigorated and reconditioned and repaired. Then we too can mount up on wings as eagles and soar and shoot outside of the cage and rise to the place God has planned for each and every one of us, where we won't be anyways tired. Well, I'm old school. So this is how I overcome justice fatigue. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean. I'm stretching out on Jesus' name, on Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. God bless you.